Hello and welcome back to the lab. Today, not on the bench, but the bench itself is going to be the topic of discussion for this video. I had a request from one of the patrons of the channel. He is moving labs, and he asked if I would talk about the bench itself and some things that I like about it, some things that I don't like about it. As with everything, nothing is perfect, and I won't even claim that this bench is perfect, having built it. There are some things that I like about it. There are some other things that I don't like about it. So with that, we will get into the bench and how it relates to the lab as a tool in and of itself. So first thing is whether you're going to sit or stand at the bench or both. So you need to decide whether you're going to have a standard desk chair, a kind of stool desk chair, which would raise the bench top higher, or just do standing. I've done work at benches of all types, and each one requires a different height. I would not recommend an adjustable height bench for the simple fact of, at least with the way I have it laid out in the test gear that I use on the regular, weight will become a considerable issue shortly. If you have carpet, there is any office chair, the wheels will pop off the bottom of the office chair. On Amazon, there are upgrades to office chairs, and they basically take a rollerblade wheel, put it on an office chair base, and you can snap them in the bottom of the chair. So it'll add about an inch to the chair. Doesn't sound like a lot, but for some of my other desks that are standard countertop height, this is a little higher than countertop height. It's almost, with a chair all the way down, it's almost a little too high. However, the rollerblade tires, they do a really good job rolling around on carpet. So your comfort windows are actually pretty tight, an inch one way or the other, and it can get a little strange. Or it can impact the ergonomics, I guess is the best way to say it. So for this bench, I went with, forgive the imperial measurements. I am in one of the weird sections of the world that decides to do everything in inches. Our bench top is 32 inches high off the floor. So that's where I set it for me. Now I'm on the taller side, so that may be a little high for some, that may be a little low. It actually is comfortable to work at standing, especially if I'm working on a piece of gear that's taller or shorter. I can stand comfortably. I can also reach the top hutch of the bench, and I'll give measurements on that in a minute. So the countertop itself is wood. This is 2 3/4 inch pieces of plywood sandwiched together. They were glued, screwed, and connected. This is a solid piece. It will never come apart again. The finish is a couple of coats of polyurethane. Nothing too major there. But it was a full 4x8 sheet of plywood with some trimming, some light trimming on it. But I have 48 inches back to front. Actually, if I go all the way to the wall, I get 51. But as you can see, there's this board back here, which is the bottom support for the hutch. And we have a power strip there, which will come in later. You can almost never have too much depth to a bench. Now, if I'd put the racks behind the bench, or the equipment on a rack behind the bench, this would be way too long. I'd be constantly reaching over the bench. But this was sized for a 7000 series scope to sit and then still give me room in front to work. Because in front of this 7603, I have 16, we'll call it 19 inches of working space in front of this scope, and it's at an angle. I could pick up a little bit more of that, a little bit more space if I pushed it flat, but it'd be less useful for troubleshooting because I do all the troubleshooting sitting right here. This space is relatively small. The dimensions of the room for the lab are 15 feet this way, 14 foot this way. So our room's relatively small. There's a lot of stuff packed in here. That does not count any of the component storage. That's just the bench, the 2 computers, and the repair surface and the test equipment. We're going to be setting all this stuff. We're going to be tearing all this stuff down and setting all this stuff up again. Not in the near future, but in the future, we will be migrating to a larger space. As things have continued to keep rolling, this is only going to grow, and it's going to get bigger. As it gets bigger, you guys are coming along for the ride. I'm going to make all the mistakes so you guys don't have to. Those are plans for the future. For right now, this is where we're at. So this hutch is a 3/4 inch piece of plywood cut in half, folded over, and split. So this is about 2 feet deep. The bench top is about 4 feet deep. And the hutch sits exactly 2 feet, 24 inches above the bench top. So that seems to be a nice, at least for me, spot where I can reach things up here as we look up. This equipment gets a lot of use. So the golden area of the bench, the soldering stations are eventually going to move, so they become a little bit more useful. There are some things that are annoying me having them all the way over at the side, but I don't want to put them in the center because I need this depth for some of the larger pieces of equipment that I work on. That's one of the reasons why there's never any equipment in this hole right here. It's so when I have a larger scope or something, I can actually get it back to the bench far enough so I can get it on the camera and you guys can go through the repair with me. But this space, starting from about here, up to here, over here, over there, and then back down this other side, this is kind of the sacred working space. So if you look back in the video catalog, you'll see this space is constantly evolving and changing, and equipment's getting switched in and out of this space. This is the equipment that I use on a regular basis. So if you're ever curious as to what gets the most use in the lab, it's from here to there. So that Rigel power supply up, including the 106 and the SG505s. This 200 sees a lot of use, and these the meter banks, which I've done a couple videos on, see a lot of use. This is one of the units that I, as the lab cat says hi. What are you doing? Off. Come on. There you go. This is one of the PM100 is the single-phase power analyzer that's hooked up to the current limited Variac supply. Variac is off here, and then the current limited supply is over on a bookshelf hiding behind is bolted to the side of a bookshelf hiding behind a computer. So the two pieces of equipment that don't get as much use as the 6500 are these 2 meters here. They are here because of lead length problems. They have fixed leads, and so they have to be there to really be useful. I have to be pretty close to them because I only have about 1 foot to 1.5 foot of lead length on their probes, and they're fixed. They don't have a lot of movement. Everything else I can move. Now, some of the stuff like the DSA 602, the DSA 602, which is over here, is a 1 gigahertz scope. That is about as far away as I want it. Now, it's a heavy monster. It's 90 pounds, and this spectrum analyzer is not light either. So that's why they're over there. That shelving unit that you're taking a look at, this is a very heavy-duty metal shelving unit. I think it's 250 or 300 pounds of shelf, and so it really does a lot of the heavy lifting in the lab. This is where the calibration plugins live for the scope, so when I'm off camera, that's what you guys see me using. These are okay where they're at. Using this TG gets kind of awkward because the camera lives kind of in this corner when I'm recording, so sometimes working in this corner around the camera can be kind of interesting. But this is about as far as I want to go away from the 1 gigahertz scope due to cable length, because cables can start getting lossy as they get longer. So I need that as close to as I can to where I'm doing the measurements, which are on the pad. This particular fluke meter sees very little space, and I am still working on a good solution for the hand tools. I want to do something on this side of the shelf where I can hang some of the hand tools, things like that, but I don't have that quite fixed yet. Or I should say I don't have a very good solution for that quite yet. Of the TM500 plugins, these stay. These are kind of always there. I do a lot of switching modules in and out of this power supply. So if I need a pulse generator or something like that, and not necessarily a low distortion oscillator, I'll move some stuff around. The Cal plugins stay where they're supposed to go, and they're okay there. On the benchtop itself, I've never had a weight problem up here. I would, if I could do it over again, I'd do this support a little differently for the top shelf. It works, but 8 feet is a little bit long of a span to not have a center support or something in the middle. But I wanted to keep this space as open as possible. So I am somewhat weight limited on the equipment that I can put up here, but nothing too terrible. This section right here, which is one of the legs that holds up the bench because of that center span, we have four 4x4s on the edge over here. We have a 2x4 over here, and we have a power strip, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So these were spaced for a 19-inch rack space, which is rack equipment, audio, and test equipment. The other side is spaced the same, but I don't have anything in it at the moment. Getting into power for the lab, we'll talk about what's in the wall back here underneath the foam. When I had the lab set up before I moved it into this location and did the sound treatment, the foam is just for sound treatment. Now I tend to like a deader space than most people, so I really like the sound foam there. But the lab has 4 20-amp breakers. There's 4 circuits in that wall, and there's 3 plugs on each breaker. Each breaker has 3 plugs. There's a high plug, there's a medium plug, and then there's a low plug. So I have electric above the hutch, at the bench top, and below the hutch, or below the bench on all 4 circuits. I have never run into a power problem with the lab, but 80 amps is a lot of power. The other thing you'll want to be concerned about is Shariard, who has a lot more RF gear than I do. He was burning, I think he said his standby power on his lab was 1 kilowatt because of keeping all the crystals hot and things like that. So he put everything on automation, power strips, things like that, so he could turn off crystals, let them go cold. I have the same problem with some of the equipment, like my 184. I let it go through its warm-up time if I'm going to use that, because it's 3.5 hours to heat soak the crystal. So, but it keeps the oven hot all the time, even when I'm not using it, so I didn't want to burn the electric. We can take a decent look at the hutch construction. We have 4x4 and 2x4. If I was going to redo this, I'd do the joint better, bring this over top of the 4x4 and point load this. This is not a very strong joint as designed, and that is what's holding up that span. If I had brought this over in the construction, this would be a lot stronger. That will happen next time for sure. When next time is, not quite sure yet, but stay tuned and we will figure that out. So we have 4x4 legs, and then halfway through, if I turn this way, you'll see another 2x4 support. Everything's put together with this metal strapping, incredibly strong. We build decks and things out of that around here, so not going anywhere. This ties into this runner down here, so everything is point loaded down to the bench, which is point loaded down to the floor. The bench has 5 legs in the back, 4 legs in the front. The hutch has 4 legs in the back, 2 legs in the front. So if we look down into the back corner, we have a 4x4 here, we have a 4x4 there. We have a 2x4 here. And those tie into a vertical 2x4 so they don't kick out the bottom and cam out. That is incredibly strong. I've not had a problem. These are not actually bolted together, so the hutch is not bolted to the bench. If I unloaded everything and unplugged everything, this will move with no problem. Never had any issues with that, and it's plenty strong. There is some dead space here in the corner because of the soldering equipment here, so I lose some of this shelf space, but that's just standard shelf dynamics. If I need to, what I can do is I can pull this shelf this way and get all of this stuff and get more access to the shelving. I will have to move one of the computers. It gets kind of close, and I have to get around that behind that shelf for just moving around in the lab. The Variac current limited non-isolation supply. So the isolation transformers are actually hiding down here. These white boxes are the isolation transformers. They're 1,000 VA each. I have both of them hooked up into the isolation supply. One is configured for 240 volts, which does not get used very often. The other one's configured for 120 volts. So it's Variac, bulbs, isolation transformer. The isolation transformers then come up to a couple of power strips. This power strip right here, this power strip right here, and this power strip right here are on the isolation transformer. So anything that I plug into there is on the current limited supply and is being monitored by the PM100. I can also bypass the current limited supply and hook it directly to line output or line voltage, and we do that on occasion. However, that usually requires me to move a power plug. Power strips, though, that are not on the Variac and isolation supply, you can never have enough. There's a thin power strip up here on this corner of the hutch. There's another one over here on this corner of the hutch. There's a power strip back there, power strip right there, power strip right there, and another power strip back there. There's also 3 large power strips underneath the table where a lot of the equipment plugs in and gets power. So you can never have enough power on the bench. There's even more power strips behind this shelf for this equipment. These aren't even on the bench power strips. So there really is power going everywhere in here, and you can never have enough. You will always be fighting a lack of plugs. Just kind of is. And doesn't stop. I agonized about the building material that I made this bench out of. I spent probably 6 months looking for a buying solution. Couldn't find anything I wanted. What I did want was horrendously expensive because it was custom built laboratory furniture. The lab furniture that I did find either wasn't available, horrifically expensive, or metal, and I didn't want a metal countertop for this bench because of the high voltage power supplies and things like that I work on. I don't want to have a scope open doing a calibration and all of a sudden the scope arcs to the bench because the bench is sitting on ground, or at least for the 4,000 volt supply, what would be ground. So wood was once I decided I was going to build the bench myself, wood was the material of preference. For teardown, just in case, because I was possibly planning the move when this was constructed, although it was pretty far off. Everything is put together with that metal strapping. I can take everything apart except for the bench top, but everything can break down into pieces and get out of here the same way it got in up the stairs. So it is easily workable. Now, for some things that the lab needs to do better. So I need to really work out my cable storage. So I have some stiffer. This is a decent quality tech cord, and they're starting to hang out again. But I had some of these cords develop a small kink in it because of how they were hanging over nails and things like that. So actually, will it? Oh yeah, it will. It's got this bow in it as it comes down. It's kind of hard to see off camera, but it's readily apparent in person. There, that works. So I definitely want these BNC cables to be hanging, let gravity assist as opposed to looping them over a shelf. So to that end, we have some of these. We have some cable organizers. I really like these fingers cable organizers. I need to find better ways or better places in the lab to get more of these. The sound deadening foam that deadens out this room for recording also kind of makes it really hard to use the wall to hang stuff. So I have to be really picky about where stuff like this goes, although I'm going to be working on getting some of this on that metal shelf, bolting that in and strapping that down. I just don't have I haven't had time yet to work on that one, and even hanging up like that, I have some BNC cables that are still too long that'll hit the ground and kind of curve up. But for test leads and things like that, this has been fantastic. Everything hangs nice with gravity. Nothing gets kinks. This has been fantastic. These are Panduit, I think, cable fingers, but they work very, very well for cables for test lead storage. For routing some signals to and from standards, like the rubidium standard for some of the RF gear, I've been using a lot of these. These are labeled as CCTV power cables. They're not. I don't even want to try to pronounce that, but these are RG136. These were an Amazon purchase, by the way. RG136 coaxial cables. They are 50 ohm cables. They are terminated with 50 ohm ends, as we can see there. However, they are not CCTV power cables, but for what they are, they're relatively inexpensive, very flexible. They can get in and around things, and I don't have to fight with them like I do some of the thicker BNC cables. So also, they have a pretty good noise performance in terms of rejecting noise. So I have to get the rubidium standard frequency from there over to the frequency counter. There's one of these cables running along the back of the hutch over here to get to the 10 megahertz reference. Same thing is true for the other frequency counter here. And then because the rubidium sits here in the lab, pardon the camera movement, because the rubidium sits there, most of the RF gear found its way to the rack because it let the cable runs for the frequency standard get shorter. So that spectrum analyzer, that one, this time mark generator, that signal source. There's a lot of RF gear in the rack, partly because the RF gear is heavy. I mean, there is a considerable amount of weight in some of these spectrum analyzers, especially that one. This spectrum analyzer also has to be at the top of the stack. There's a whole bunch of RF connections on the top of that one if you ever take the covers off, and you can get errors if there's too much weight on top of that. So that's actually part of the order of these two, is the DSA on the bottom and the low frequency spectrum analyzer on the top. So some future plans for the lab, everything like that. Even before we talk about moving facilities, we are going to rearrange this room a little bit. There's probably going to end up being a soldering workstation, especially when some vision upgrades happen. That's going to cause some rearranging. It's also going to free up a bit of space in this corner, and this corner for sure is going to get reworked. The bench in the lab is in a constant state of flux. Everything's changing. As the needs change, things happen. We work on more things and make more videos. Let me know what you guys think. I've been toying around with the idea of maybe putting a GoPro here so I get a down shot. Let me know what you guys think of that. I'm not 100% sure yet. For a repair space, this is very functional. For a shooting space, there could be a few more cameras. Not 100% sure yet. We're doing everything with one camera right now. Also, as the channel grows, we do have plans to take the channel into 4K to get some high-def repair going. and but those are all plans for the future. So if anybody has any questions about the bench, or why I have picked gear that I have, or am using specific pieces of gear, or what I use specific pieces of gear for, we did an in-depth lab tour where I talked about every piece of gear that was in the lab. However, that's about 2 years old now, so might do another one of those here in the future, just to kind of show how the lab has changed, because I don't remember if I even had that shelving unit. I think I just started with that shelving unit when I did the lab tour. So it's been kind of crazy. Component storage. I showed these in one other video. These are bin boxes, and these have some of the highest density shelf storage that I have ever found. You get shelves, I've got 9 shelves on one shelving unit, and in the shelves I'm using these bin boxes to store components. With a label printer, we make a nice label for what they are, and then that gives me the highest density component storage that I have ever found. I guess I have a whole bunch of 100 microfarad capacitors in stock, but so because I really hate having to wait on shipping when I'm doing a repair, I will buy, if I need something, I'll buy it in bulk. When I get the rest of the lab presentable, we'll get into component storage, things like that, in a future video. These bin boxes, though, you buy them, I get them from Uline. The bad news is you have to buy them in packs of 100. However, you buy them for the depth of the shelf. And then, so what you order is shelf depth, width of box. This is a 4-inch, this is a 2-inch. I think that's a 2-inch. Yes, that is a 2-inch box. And so you can get them all up to 12-inch, 12 and 24-inch wide, real wide boxes. So they will even hold up. I have some 12-inch boxes that are holding power transformers in some of my less temperature-sensitive storage. But yeah, these work great for component storage, and the highest density I've found yet. If anybody knows anything more dense, let me know, because I could use it. So I hope that answers some questions about the bench itself as a tool. Some of the stuff I'd change if I could do it over again. And everything that is still in evolution and process. The bench and the lab are going to be a continual evolution and process. Never going to be finished. It's always going to change. But we are going to run through this together. So if anybody has any questions, hit me up in the description, in the comments below. Check the description for any links. And I will see everybody in the next video. As always, more is on the way.